Can you imagine chatting with your lifelong friends, all laid back? Well, imagine the case where a pink-haired girl arrives and mentions that everyone should fall asleep. For this, the girl there leans on her window and begins to recount that the world no longer has modifications, and this is due to a warrior who tirelessly fights to prevent the world we know from being destroyed. In the next moment, we see our protagonist, who, as mentioned, is fighting, as we see him surrounded by many demons who want to end him. But gradually, watching the fight scenes, we verify that our protagonist is superior. For this, we go back a year when the protagonist was a nobody, as he was commonly harassed by people because of his jobs. And well, those annoying people one day threw his kitten into the water. The protagonist jumps in search of his little one, but already inside, he remembers that he can't swim, and in his misfortune, he thinks that his whole life was miserable. Although he endures, the next moment, the protagonist wakes up alive with his cat, to which he separates and looks at his friend, who tells him that the most popular girl in school saved him. So he should thank her, something that our protagonist is remembering. He realizes that she is already super wealthy and has many suitors. And back to the present, we see the protagonist fighting non-stop, and after displaying several mysterious abilities, he manages to give a similar response. Already at the top, he mentions that he fights for the world and, above all, for her, deducing that she is the girl who saved him, the pink-haired one, as he wants to see her again. A memory comes to light, as apparently they knew each other as children since the Pink movie was lost. Still, the protagonist establishes that she was fine, and they became friends. In the next moment, we move to a scene where two boyfriends went to a cemetery to be together. I think they're a little crazy or don't know how to think. The thing is, the girl wanted to force a kiss on the guy if it weren't for a demon showing up. Just kidding. It was the protagonist years ago, before he became a super warrior. And well, as I told you, he used to have many jobs because he had no money. At that time, he was a gardener, and after finishing his work, he enters a video game where everyone knows him because of his expert skills. Since he easily defeats everyone, he was leveling up until he met a girl who was running away from a demon. And well, being a gallant man, he decides to save her, so here they both meet, have a conversation that was going further if it weren't for the lights going out. In this case, the protagonist, as best as he can, climbs the lamppost since he wanted to keep playing. Something that goes well for him, as unintentionally he sees the pink-haired waifu, who didn't think he was fixing the light but rather spying on her. With that, a pillow that throws the mica falls, and he ends up knocked out. The next day at school, we see the protagonist working, as I told you he has many jobs. So unintentionally, he hears the waifu, who comments that her father is a rich man who created a final game. The next moment, the protagonist looks at her avatar and realizes that she is the girl from yesterday. For that, the protagonist's friend appears and mentions that she is unattainable for him because she has many suitors, and we see him in the next moment. But the friend doesn't even protect him from those annoying guys. And later, the protagonist thinks that he shouldn't fall in love with the Pink movie. For that, the girl looks for him in the game and asks him to be friends. Yes, and the protagonist goes crazy because, while making a delivery, he says that he spent a lot of time with the waifu. Since they wanted several missions together and had a good time until one day she asked him what he was like in real life, something that the protagonist doesn't know how to answer. Outside the game, in his sadness, he confesses that he has no one by his side due to his heavy workload, lack of money, and the absence of family. That's why the protagonist believes he should never be with her. Nevertheless, both, unaware, find themselves face to face. The thing is, our guy planned to maintain his anonymity for life. As long as they talked through the game, that was enough. All would be fine if it weren't for the announcement that they are going to close the game. With that news, the protagonist ends up affected the next day, as the only person he had fun with in a long time will be gone, thinking it's the end of the world. On the other hand, we meet the waifu's father, who hands her a suitcase and tells her that if something happens to him, she should open the suitcase and follow his instructions. Immediately, he mentions that a new game has arrived, one that will change the course of life since it surpasses reality. Returning to the protagonist, he still feels sad. He approaches his friend and tries to cheer him up, but to no avail. Our guy ends up escaping, and being far away, he encounters the waifu's limousine. Yaki mentions that he has an important meeting. Later, in the game, the pink-haired girl had been summoned by the protagonist. By the way, he had somehow stolen internet and electricity and connects anyway. Together, the waifu tells him that there is only 1 week left, so they should make the most of it. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks that for the girl, it's just a game and nothing special, so he plays along. Later, the waifu says she wants to find a rare object in that whole world, and the protagonist offers, ending up in a splash. Days pass, and the game that would surpass it arrives, presented in the best way. What will differentiate it from all other games is that the more you pay, the more power you have. So it's a pay to win. After that announcement, the protagonist feels sad because the next day the game that brought him together with his soulmate will close. Inside the game, they have a party, and we see the pink-haired girl, who is sad about the end of the game. Also, the girl's father seems mysterious, as he fires his secretary and asks to be left alone. Immediately, the protagonist falls off his bike and loses the merchandise because he had to meet the waifu, but he couldn't. On the last day, he won't be able to see her. At this point, a girl enters the waifu's father's building and crosses paths with him. She pulls out her weapon and asks him if he will help with grave robbing. Meanwhile, the game was about to close, and a disaster suddenly occurs. Everyone is dying at the hands of a demon. Going back to the waifu's father, he refuses the redhead's requests and dies. Apparently, the waifu's father had something the new game wanted and died protecting that information. Likewise, in our protagonist's game, the pink-haired girl tries to fight the demon but can't. So the protagonist, after many setbacks, manages to connect. Unfortunately, he arrives late and finds his waifu defeated. In his despair, he cries, and it seemed that everything would change, take a different turn. If it weren't for the demon arriving and ending up killing the waifu. Finally, the game comes to an end. Personally, I think it's a good conclusion, but for the protagonist, it's not the same. On a cloudy day, walking, our guy crosses paths with the love of his life. Yes, the redhead meets him, and it turns out she was like an administrator of the game. So she always knew who he was. Even feeling bad for failing on the last day, the girl comforts him and asks him to save her in the next game, the new one. Not much time passes, and the news of the waifu's father's death becomes public. After being gossiped about by his friend, the protagonist goes in search of the pink-haired girl. Upon arriving at her apartment, her friends tell him she's not there. Quickly, he goes to a computer room and watches the funeral. At this point, all the people who attended the funeral pretend that the waifu's father had many debts, and that's why they sought him, obviously false. Although something strange happens because the protagonist has visions of the waifu's father as if he already knew him. The next day, our guy is summoned by the waifu, who has opened a box with a console and a note that says, "Deliver this console to our guy." After registering, the protagonist learns that she was never her father's daughter, but was adopted. This turns out to be quite strange. At one point, the pink-haired girl is called by her secretary, who mentions that she has visitors. Outside, some thugs are waiting for her, and somehow, the protagonist returns with her. He realizes something strange about the console, and it turns out that 10 trillion yen has been recharged into it instantly. Scared, the protagonist hears a voice from the waifu's father revealing in his last audio that he is the protagonist's grandfather. Meanwhile, the people who killed him are plotting something bad, as a demon controls them. Returning to the protagonist, the father and grandfather of the kids tell them that they left that fortune for them to live together in a comfortable life. The protagonist thinks it over, but the audio doesn't end. It reveals that the enemy killed the waifu's real parents, so they will have to constantly fight. And we see the thugs wanting to take the waifu away. Seeing that, the protagonist goes down and wants to fight, but he can't. he is not as strong as in his game. So, he is easily swept away. Nevertheless, the protagonist did not give up, and when they were about to take her, our guy tells them that he will give them a lot of money, referring to what he had in the console. So, he goes up to the apartment and takes out his console, but it turns out that the money in it is fictitious. So, he can't pay anything. They forcefully take the waifu, and she thanks him as best she can. Everything very surreal. Hold on, because the protagonist is the protagonist and doesn't give up. He follows them with his bike, pedaling, and he catches up. But the bad guys don't let them join, and due to the speed, the protagonist falls. At that moment, far away, a person appears in the car. In a second, our guy arrives, and everything here was destroyed, and the mysterious guy just says he's waiting for him in the new game. In a second, he leaves taking the waifu. Well, yes, he takes the waifu. At night, the protagonist looks for a way to enter the game, and he can't. But I think his desire to be inside makes a girl appear and take him. In the world of magic and a game, there were only weird things. But this is just the beginning. A group of adventurers mentions that the tomb house has begun. In a second, a demon appears to the protagonist. And for you to understand, I'll tell you something about where this comes from, and it turns out that all this is a creation of a goddess who, after creating the world and life, was left without strength, wandering in a deep sleep. But she left her strength lurking, and several people are looking for it by digging graves. Back to the protagonist. After seeing the demon, he gets scared, and so do his little friends, who are his guides, and hide like little girls. In this case, the triangle reveals that it is powerful and mentions that it will test him to see if he can be a tomb keeper. Our guy ignores him, but the triangle tells him that if he doesn't want to save the pink-haired girl, it makes our guys interested, but the bad guys from before attack and fail luckily. It seems they are looking for a grave, and returning to our guy, he talks to the little triangle, and they agree to guard the grave. Likewise, the little triangle summons a desert goddess who, upon seeing the protagonist, kisses him. Now with those memories, the protagonist becomes nostalgic about the time he spent with his grandfather. Although not for long, since the little triangle opens its head, and his grandfather comes out. Because it turns out he was always there, so the grandfather calmly tells him that maybe he can't explain what's going on, but he asks him to defend the grave since, at once, the bad guys come to search and attack. After running like there's no tomorrow, they arrive at a base where a dwarf attacks, and it seemed like she won, but that wasn't the real mecha, since out of nowhere one of the earth comes out and wins the battle. Or not, this is just beginning, because the dwarf wasn't alone but with her group, who also fight and attack from afar. After several setbacks, the protagonists manage to dominate the machine. So with a weapon, they counterattack, and they throw it, something that they win completely here. But not if it weren't for the fact that the bad guys counteract everything. So now the bad guys do their tricks, and it turns out that the blonde throws 3, which the desert goddess can't resist. She attacks, spending all the bullets, and the protagonists are attacked again, so they spent fighting until in the end, the grandfather of the protagonist says goodbye because he was only a hologram with artificial intelligence, and he can't stay there because the energy wasn't enough. It's true, and disappears without first asking his grandson to save the pink-haired girl. Likewise, he reveals that he is the last guardian exactly of the graves, and that was enough for the protagonist to lose control, to which with his fury, he ended all those bad guys. For that, the desert goddess also leaves because her role ends there. So now the protagonist is alone. In a second, another weird guy appears who doesn't believe he'll have to fight the protagonist because for her, he's just a kid. So she mentally leaves him, as our guy wakes up again in his bed, and here he had the wand, but it's gone. It's kind of weird. For that, a person calls him and tells him that she's waiting for him, giving him a location, along with a photo of the waifu. Meanwhile, we see how the world is functioning, and it turns out that since the new game was inaugurated, people began to count the money from there, and it's no longer the dollar or yen or peso. That is, everything is inside the game, and everything that is worth in the game is worth in real life as money, so bad people start looting because the money from there will be worth outside, so it suits them. Meanwhile, the protagonist investigates the game developers so that he can safely go to the location, to which, on the other hand, we see the waifu being courted by a guy who tells her that she will never leave that place. Returning to the thieves, they are still indulging themselves in the same way. They continue their routine as usual, getting more money in a bad way. Until one day, a girl arrives and ends up giving them a lesson, exactly the one who appeared in the mind of the protagonist. The case is that the girl gave a lesson to all those people, sending them once again with Jesus. But since it's a game, they revive, and returning to the protagonist, he finally decides to go to the place, and apparently, there are more people to meet. Initially, we will see two boys living in a poor city in the real world. To enter the game, they manage to obtain consoles. So the boy tells the red-haired girl to enter and earn money to get out of that place. To do this, he looks for a tournament in which the winner takes home 10,000 yen. But there's a problem. To enter the tournament, you need to have at least 1,000. The desperate boy wants to enter, so he climbs a tower and falls. Just kidding. Just passing by was the main character with his guide, who can transform into a waifu. Both notice the kid and help him enter the tournament. Inside, several participants are fighting, and once again, we see the guys who steal. The desperate boy unexpectedly jumps from the air and sends the guy there to meet his maker. With no opponent and the other boy asking to fight, since the rules mention that if a participant drops out, anyone can replace them. With that use, he goes to fight. You might wonder, why the eagerness to fight? It turns out that the red-haired girl, who always took care of him, is going to die. She's in an operation, and if he doesn't get 10 million yen, the girl will die. Immediately, he goes to fight, but the main character stops him because he doesn't have enough strength. Our boy jumps and puts on a good show, but it didn't last long. The main character is also a fool and was about to be killed. Just kidding. The waifu saves him and tells him that she will always be there for him. Furthermore, she reveals that she will turn into something terrifying as she transforms into the two filthy things from before. Endure. What is that effect? But not for long. The boy, now defending her, makes the guide girl return to her previous state, and now she truly becomes something terrifying, a dragon. He wins the battle, and with that, the prize. The boy returns to the normal world and can save his girl. The main character continues on his way in search of the waifu, and that's how it ends. Months passed, and our guy got familiar with the place. He's strolling around the terrain until he comes across some guys, one of whom is not so friendly, and the other is, as he apparently knows the main character in real life. He hears that little by little he's becoming a great warrior. For that, a girl arrives who apparently is in charge of them, as she will teach them more about the terrain. She is thus an instructor. To start, they go to a canyon where there are many demons, and here they start fighting. At first, it's tough because no one has ever seen these kinds of demons. These demons have a three-eyed leader who commands them as their king. To do this, the arrogant-looking guy launches himself and starts hitting it, easily defeating the demon and proving that he's not just anyone. Likewise, the girl from the group also destroys the demons. Something I didn't tell you is that the money they earn there serves in real life. That's why at the beginning, I told you it's a game linked to reality. The girl, as I mentioned, is just a guide, and to leave the place, they now have to defeat her. So, as the final test, she asks them to defeat her, which didn't take much, and without realizing, she nails a stake in the head of the shortest one, who ends up unconscious. Next was the protagonist. Unable to endure it, the arrogant purple-haired guy launches himself and wants to defeat her. So, they start fighting as if there were no tomorrow. The battle was epic until the chubby guy wakes up and reveals that the arrogant purple-haired guy is a super warrior who participated in tournaments and won them. However, there are no records of him. Well, at the second, we see that it's true. Something they didn't mention is that apparently, his father is forcing him to risk his life and gain recognition in the game. As I remind you, they have to defeat the girl to pass the level, so the chubby guy and the protagonist have no choice but to join the battle. At first, the chubby guy shows his power. Yes, he is pierced, and from here, unfortunately, our chubby guy dies and leaves the game. But don't worry, nothing sad happens since he's doing great in the real world, telling his mom that he made new friends. Back to the game, the protagonist and the arrogant guy have to figure out how to defeat the girl in the duel. The purple-haired guy couldn't, and the protagonist could because he discovered the girl's plan. The girl on the other side is just a hologram, and the real one is a dwarf. Our guys passed the test, and now they will level up and receive more advantage items. Likewise, the purple-haired guy is furious, so he attacks the protagonist because he wants to prove his strength, but when dodging, he wants to attack the dwarf. The guy is crazy watching this. The protagonist saves the dwarf, and they enter a tavern. The girl asks why he saved her, to which our guy says it's because he wants her to help with her powers. She thinks it's a date, but endure, the protagonist has his jar, as out of nowhere, his game guide talks to him and tells him not to flirt with anyone because she's there, meaning she's a bit jealous. So, the protagonist cuts her off and tells the dwarf that if he defeats the purple-haired guy, he can join his group. So, excited, he goes to fight. Wait, the guy found them. But don't worry, now our guy will get serious. So, he starts gathering his strength and attacks, easily giving the impression he's ready to unleash his power. The purple-haired guy can't take it, it's the end for him. Listening to the protagonist, the purple-haired guy gets even angrier and remembers that he was always underestimated because they believed his game fights were rigged for him to win. So, he's hurt that no one believed in him. Gradually, he goes mad, and now that he sees the protagonist as an opponent, he wants to defeat him. So, he starts unleashing his true power. With that, a car can't endure it, it's the end for the car. With this, the final battle is near. Meanwhile, on the other side, we see how the game developers are debating about the profits. As I mentioned before, the normal world is fused with the game, mentioning that the common demons from the game can also come out into reality. In summary, there's a demon in real life controlling the developers. Knowing the protagonist's power and running the risk, they want to make him disappear. Returning to this, he continues with his battle. For that, the purple-haired guy couldn't take it anymore, and screaming that he's very strong, he uses all his power. So, he didn't think and wanted to overpower the guys, but he couldn't since for some reason, the protagonist, without lifting a finger, defeats him. It turns out that, at first sight, he has great strength. There's a big explosion, and here our guy manages to save the dwarf's life once again, and as he said before, if he defeated the purple-haired one, he would be on his team, and so it was. Until out of nowhere, a girl arrives, rescues them, but seems intimidating, as the dwarf, with his power, analyzes her and sees that she has a unique ability among billions. And that surprises him. She's very dangerous, and we see that when she's here and shoots the dwarf. Calm down, she only neutralized her for the moment, since it turns out the girl just wanted to talk privately with the protagonist. Likewise, she throws an animal, and apparently, it's something very mysterious, as it forces its way into the protagonist's stomach. And the answer comes, and it's that this animal will make our guy find the waifu, meaning the girl he's there for, as apparently, the redhead knows her or knows where she is. So, she tells him the location, gives him a key to enter the castle, and asks him not to trust anyone, as many people will come after him. At the second, the girl, before leaving, notices that someone is spying on them, so she attacks him in the same way. They escape from the place, and for that, the protagonist goes to where the dwarf, who is already fine. The protagonist realizes that this guy knows where the waifu is, so he tries to catch him. However, it turns out it's not easy, as the masked person has super speed. Despite his efforts, the protagonist can't keep up and, instead, is increasingly humiliated. Just when it seemed like all was lost, the little girl covers for him and saves the protagonist. At that moment, the masked person escapes, and once everything is calmer, our guy thanks the dwarf for saving him. However, the pursuit by the masked person continues, and now, with their super speed, they harm the girl. Despite this, the fight is not over, as both continue to battle and receive several cuts, reaching the point where the game kicks them out. Back in his room, the protagonist wakes up and receives a call from a guy who warns him not to try to save the waifu if he's not prepared, as they need her more than he does. Additionally, he urges him to level up, make friends, and gradually stand out, as there are people who will be after him. Although it's not clear if the guy is good or bad, he at least seems to be helping in some way. At that moment, our guy questions why he's not as strong in the current game as he was in the previous one, precisely when he met his girl. Even his kitten no longer brightens his days as it used to, despite always being with him. However, one early morning, he wakes up to a lot of noise and discovers that people are harassing a girl, possibly a new student. It turns out to be the game instructor girl, and when their eyes meet, she asks the protagonist to get her out of there. This leads to the protagonist being criticized by his friends due to their envy. They decide to go to a cafe, where they notice that the girl has a suitcase, suggesting that she might be planning to live with the protagonist. In any case, the waitress approaches and asks if they're going to order anything, as many people are waiting outside for that. The dwarf starts ordering a barbecue, a cake, a pudding, a jelly, a steak, and a piece of poop. Just kidding, but the girl requests many things, which scares the protagonist because he only has a few cents in his wallet, but in the game, he has millions. So, RIP for our guy, as he doesn't know how he will pay. At that moment, some bullies who always bother the protagonist arrive and ask how it's possible that a poor guy like him wants to order something to eat in that luxurious place. The dwarf then shouts that the protagonist has millions in the virtual game. Our guys feel embarrassed, but apparently, it's not a big deal or uncommon because, as I mentioned before, reality is intertwined with the game. So, the coins that have value there also have value here. Our guy pays and astonishes those guys, and one more thing, our protagonist is literally a multi-millionaire. Well, after that, our guy returns to his apartment, and here his roommates accuse him of being unfaithful since he used to hang out with the waifu before, but now he's with someone else. When he gets to his room, our guy talks to the dwarf and tells her not to get mad about what she heard. He also mentions that he will search for the pink-haired girl and bring her back since she's captured in the virtual world. So, he thanks her for being with him. And thus, this great duo begins, as they enter the game again and reappear in a coliseum, eventually strolling around. Meanwhile, the dwarf tells us that the conquest of level 18 will start soon, which is a quick leveling strategy. Similarly, the protagonist remembers that the guy who called him said that reaching a certain level would bring him closer to the waifu. For that, the dwarf asks the protagonist about his relationship with the guys who attacked him, and our guy doesn't know why they are following him. However, he might get an answer. So, he takes out his phone, opens his browser. Hold on, there's a girl inside it, I don't know, but thinking the worst, the dwarf turns her face away. However, to calm down, they decide to eat, and both of them eat non-stop. Suddenly, some guys start talking about a powerful warrior who has a lot of money and defeated several enemies. Listening to this, the protagonist thinks they are talking about him. So, he doesn't know what to do and wanted to escape. Wait, they are not talking about him, they are referring to an administrator. Out of nowhere, the administrator throws rings, and when you put them on, they teleport you to another place. It turns out that an event has suddenly emerged, and everyone is eager to see what it is, so they all enter, and our guys are no exception. They also enter the place, and here we see that everything is a trap because the administrator guys did that to test the power of our guy. So, at level 0, they all find themselves, and at first, everything seemed normal. Well, no, demons gradually started attacking, and only the strong would pass the test. For that, one of the leaders makes a single move and takes out all the demons. Wait, he did that to awaken an even bigger one and thus end all adventurers, as that is the demon leader. So, F for those who are there. But on the other hand, we see again the guys the protagonist fought with at the beginning. The thing is, they don't stay still either. So, Elena, well, she creates a hole in reality, appearing right where the protagonist is, and knees him. For that, she tells our guy that their boss didn't want him to see the protagonist, yet she is a rebel and went to him. In a sudden move, she shows a mirror, inside the mirror, the waifu. He remembers that they are present, and our guy can't hold back, goes to the mirror, and shouts that he will rescue her soon, just hold on a little longer. By the way, if it weren't for the water not listening, ugly little thing. Although, for a moment, it did, but the purple-haired girl removed it, I guess. Now she wants to know what kind of power the protagonist has. On the other hand, we see how the demon from a while ago easily finishes off all the adventurers. Moreover, he doesn't even move his hands, as he suddenly summons mosquitoes that start sucking the adventurer's blood. For that, he is bored and looks for an opponent, and unintentionally, he ends up where the protagonist is, who is about to fight the purple-haired girl. But everything calms down because this guy, this type here, didn't plan to attack. Instead, he was designed to support the protagonist. So he gives him a key, and in the same way, he transforms into an even larger demon and reveals a part of his heart, breaking which our guy will recover part of his memory. It turns out that he has only been conscious since the age of 16, so our guy's past is for that. The protagonist won't get it so easily. This is how he has to fight the demon, and now the protagonist will show who he is. Out of nowhere, he takes out a sword that he had stored, with which he begins to fight, and we see that he is very fast. Also, he throws the demon to the ground and tries to stab him. No, wait, the demon doesn't give up, and he regenerates with the blood of the fallen heroes, so he is invincible below. Seeing this, the protagonist tries to fight, but he is easily thrown. For that, his sword was about to break, and the demon tells him that he has 80 seconds to steal his heart, as if not, he will die. Still, our guy will not give up, since once he defeats him, he will be closer to his girl. So he will leave everything in the battle. And he does, almost cutting him, but he couldn't. Seeing that he gave his all, our guy, several adventurers remaining, were encouraged and launched themselves, but they were also swept away. The matter didn't last long, and unfortunately, our guy was against the wall, and he had no more strength. I mean, the rescue for his girl has failed. No, kidding. He had an ace up his sleeve, causing the demon to petrify and self-destruct. With that, the protagonist finally managed to win, also paving the way to the human waifu. The demon asks how it's possible that he defeated him, to which our guy explains that when he cut him, he left some oxygen and poison in his blood. With that, it was only a matter of seconds before his body collapsed, and so it happened. On the other hand, some guys suddenly arrive and ask who's responsible. Similarly, it didn't take long, and they start beating the remaining adventurers because apparently they are a faction within the game that is responsible for robbing or killing the biggest leaders. And well, seeing that they arrived late and our guy already defeated the demon, they plan to take the demon's heart since, just like him, they want to reach the bottom of the game. For that, the protagonist, obviously, won't allow it, so he starts to fight. The leader, to scare the protagonist, shows his sword, which shows how much power each one has. And we see that they all have a big shiny sword until our guy takes out his sword and shows that he has a longer one. With that, he ends up scaring the guys there. Although already bored, the purple-haired girl sends them flying. And it seems that she is not so bad since she started helping the protagonists. Similarly, the demon does. Exactly, his head, as it ends up reaching a mysterious door with the protagonist. The thing is, the guy, already in a white room, asks the protagonist to eat his heart, and he does it. What I remember, they're present. And our guy had already been in that game when he was little. Since I don't know how, ask his grandfather, who, by the way, is with Jesus. The thing is, you don't have to be too smart to realize that there is a girl present. Cry, I'll reveal something to you. Yes, the protagonist's waifu. The thing is, Her power ensures that something called a tomb is safe. So from there, we realize why they took her, as she is more important than we think. As we see, our guy already knew the waifu, but he lost his memory. And we see it now, since the grandfather took away his memory so that both of them are not in danger. But who would have thought that they would meet in the future? Well, the grandfather also sealed his memory of the protagonist with the demon already seen, and we see his creation. Similarly, his mission was always to reach the protagonist. And so it was, as now he will serve as a weapon, as he is his in body and soul. With this, our guy manages to become friends with the dwarf, the purple-haired girl, so he asks to talk to his girl once again. And well, she accepts, as the protagonist is good. To which here, after many months, they talk again. And our guy's only deign to tell her that he misses her, loves her, and will fight for her. And that she just holds on a little longer, as he will reach the second mirror portal. It closes, but at least they saw each other again. Oh, love. For that, our guy, with his new power, there will be no one to stop him. So he begins little by little to overcome any complication until, in the end, he crosses paths with a leader, what do I say, a leader but one of the 6 best warriors in the game. For that, the protagonist already formed that select group of 6, and these 6 also have their purpose and goal, like the protagonist, and what prevented it was a door, as they cannot pass. So it's a face-to-face confrontation with the future. In the case of the protagonist, beyond the door is the waifu, and so it ends. This is where the anime ended, but if you want me to summarize its continuation, watch the video again because I hid a little Easter egg inside, and leave your like.